In the scorching summer of 1967, the map of the Middle East was redrawn in less than a week. A war that lasted only 6 days, but its wounds have yet to heal even half a century later. This is the story of what came before that war, from the first sparks to the moment the world stood on the edge of an explosion. How did World War II end, yet peace never arrive in the Middle East? Why did the creation of a new country ignite a regional inferno? And what decisions, made behind closed doors, pushed the region toward catastrophe? In this episode, we journey back in time to the War of 1948, the first direct clash between Arabs and Israelis, to the Suez crisis and the rise of a charismatic figure named Gamal Abdel Nasser, and to the year when Arab armies joined forces to crush Israel, unaware they were marching toward their own defeat. This is a story of power and politics, of miscalculations paid for in blood. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a plan to end the conflict between Jews and Arabs in Palestine. The partition of the land into 2 independent states, the Jewish side, still reeling from the horrors of the Holocaust, accepted the plan, but the Arab side rejected it. They argued that the land was entirely Arab and that no Jewish state had the right to exist there. On May 14, 1948, just hours after the last British forces withdrew, David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, declared the establishment of the State of Israel. Only hours later, the armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon launched a coordinated assault on the new state. What followed quickly escalated into a full-scale war. At first glance, the balance seemed obvious. 5 Arab nations against a fledgling state with fewer people and limited resources. But the outcome was not what the Arab world had anticipated. Within months, Israel not only defended itself, it captured more territory than the UN had originally allocated. Around 700,000 Palestinians were displaced. And with political and military backing from the West, Israel secured its place on the world map. For Israel, the war marked a beginning. For the Arab world, it marked the opening of wounds that have yet to close. In 1952, Egypt witnessed a military coup. King Farouk was overthrown, and a young, ambitious officer, Gamal Abdel Nasser, quickly rose to power. But Nasser's ambitions went far beyond Egypt's borders. He aspired to lead the entire Arab world. 4 years later, in 1956, he made a move that shocked the world. He announced the nationalization of the Suez Canal, an essential artery for global trade that had long been controlled by Britain and France. Fearing for their colonial interests, Britain and France struck a secret deal with Israel. Israel would invade the Sinai from the east and advance toward the canal. Then, under the pretext of protecting the waterway, Britain and France would intervene militarily. The plan was set in motion. Israel swiftly pushed back the Egyptian army and reached the canal. But what they hadn't accounted for was the reaction of the 2 global superpowers. The United States and the Soviet Union, despite being Cold War rivals, both condemned the invasion. Under intense international pressure, the attackers were forced to withdraw. Yet something unexpected happened. Though Nasser appeared defeated militarily, in the eyes of his people, he emerged victorious. He became a symbol of Arab resistance, a charismatic leader who had dared to challenge colonial powers. And Israel, despite its military success, learned a vital lesson. In the world of politics, no victory can last without the backing of global powers. After the Suez crisis, Gamal Abdel Nasser was no longer just the president of Egypt. He became the hero of the Arab world, a bold new voice that challenged Western colonialism and promised the restoration of Arab pride. Nasser promoted Pan-Arabism, the dream of uniting all Arab nations under one cause. His fiery speeches, broadcast from Radio Cairo, reached millions in Damascus, Baghdad, Tripoli, and even Jerusalem, filling the streets with hope and excitement. But his popularity didn't remain in words alone. Nasser began building up Egypt's military, importing modern weapons from the Soviet Union, establishing domestic arms factories, and openly supporting Palestinian resistance groups. Israel watched with growing concern. Its leaders understood that Nasser was not just talking. He was building an army capable of posing a real threat. In 1958, Egypt and Syria briefly merged into a single state, the United Arab Republic. The union was short-lived, but it signaled how serious Nasser's vision had become. In Arab media, the slogan "Destroy Israel" was no longer taboo. It became a political promise, a slogan that Nasser transformed into a badge of Arab honor. But behind the slogans lay a bitter truth. No one was truly prepared for an all-out war. In early 1967, the Middle East was entering a dangerous state of agitation. On one side, Israel felt increasingly encircled. On the other, Arab states were locked in a quiet rivalry, each seeking to lead the fight against Israel. At that moment, the Soviet Union sent Egypt a secret message. Israel, it warned, was preparing a major attack on Syria. That information would later prove false, but for Nasser, it was reason enough to act. He immediately deployed the Egyptian army to the Sinai Peninsula. Then, with confidence, he demanded that United Nations peacekeepers withdraw from the Israeli border, a request that was granted without confrontation. Soon after, Egypt and Syria signed a mutual defense pact, and under political pressure and public expectation, King Hussein of Jordan joined the alliance. Three Arab nations, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, now stood united with a single goal: to defeat Israel. In Tel Aviv, this was more than a threat. Inside the Israeli government, military leaders pushed hard for a preemptive strike. At the same time, Arab public sentiment soared with confidence. In the streets, people shouted, "The final hours of Israel have arrived." But what they didn't know was that despite the political alliance, their armies were far from operationally coordinated. On May 22, 1967, Gamal Abdel Nasser made a move that crossed Israel's red line. He closed the Strait of Tiran to Israeli shipping. The Tiran Strait, a narrow waterway at the southern tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, was Israel's vital corridor for oil imports and trade with Asia. To close it, in international terms, was an act of war. In Israel, the government was stunned. Cabinet debates escalated quickly. Should we strike now, or wait for international support? General Moshe Dayan, a symbol of Israeli military might, argued that there was no time to waste. But others warned, a preemptive attack could leave Israel politically isolated. Meanwhile, Arab forces along the borders were fully mobilized. Tens of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of tanks and artillery units lined up, ready for action. In Cairo, the streets filled with flags and chants of "Death to Israel." In Tel Aviv, shops closed, schools shut down, and civilians lined up to receive gas masks. The Middle East stood on the brink of explosion, but no one knew when, where, or by whom the first spark would be struck. If you found this video informative so far, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episodes. And in the comments, let us know your thoughts. Did Nasser make a mistake by closing the Strait of Tiran? Or was he justified in escalating the pressure? In the final days of May 1967, the Middle East was silent but trembling. Armies were stationed across the borders. Artillery units were in full readiness. Pilots slept next to their fighter jets. Commanders remained glued to their radar screens deep in war rooms. In Israel, schools were closed. Reservists were called back. Over 100,000 were mobilized, and the economy came to a halt. The streets were quiet, but behind closed doors, families were preparing bomb shelters. Gas masks were being distributed. Media outlets began to speak of the threat of chemical warfare. On the other side, the streets of Cairo, Damascus, and Amman were electric with emotion. In Egypt, Nasser gave daily speeches. Arab media declared, "Victory is near." But behind the excitement, Arab military leaders were filled with doubt. The Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian commands were barely coordinated. Radar systems were incompatible. Operational plans were outdated. Each army was more concerned with defending its own front than executing a unified strategy. One side was fueled by pride and expectation, the other by fear of isolation and annihilation. And in the midst of it all, only one decision remained. Who would strike first? The next episode tells the story of a day that shook history. June 5th, 1967, the beginning of the Six-Day War. Thank you for watching the first part of this three-part documentary. Until the next episode, may there be peace, awareness, and understanding.